The drum is beaten by the mainstream media, MSM, and the chattering class, and the captains of the political elites and wannabe political elites, of an horror abroad, condemnation and demands made. It becomes a touchstone for those to prove their right-on credentials, rehearsed on thinking mantras and phrases regurgitated. I speak of Guantanamo Bay and the torture perpetrated there. I am not going to go into it here. It has been spoken about a million times. I will leave it to the people who claim to have a broad view, but speak of its many intertwined topics in narrow parameters that follows in the wake of the MSM. We follow, but can we lead? In other words, do we go against the grain? Will we stand out? Will we look beyond the narrative and the reality bestowed upon us by society? Very few of us will. Of those that do, they are the people who matter. These are the people whom advanced civilization would claim their atavistic traits from. The rest are compliant and part of the formulated excuses that allow evil to prosper. You wonder how many have a conscience. Look at the UN Convention on Human Rights. Look at one of the simplest forms of torture, as old as time. Yes, that's right, sleep deprivation. It is going on in Bray Town in County Wicklow. It is going on in towns up and down this country. Where are the protests, the public discourse, the banner headlines? Nowhere. That's where. Tell us more. Where is this torture chamber, this house of horrors? This is the Simon Homeless Hostel. It has the name San Remo, beside the Garda station on the Simonton Road. Again, in Bray Town. For public consumption it is a charity, in reality a business. This is where the barbarity is being practiced. Every 3 hours or less, the staff interrupt their residents' sleep, stopping the dysfunctional in their tracks from any chances of being functional. That's what happens with sleep deprivation. Why should the sane and the sober and the functioning addict suffer because of the chronic addict and the suicidal and the mentally unstable? Because the Simon and their policy seem to think so. There's no justification for it. You can deduce that yourself, but stick with me and you will be illuminated. Let's go back to the start. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. A few students frustrated by what they saw on the streets of Dublin back in the 60s, and they started out looking for to do something different from what was there already, and put something new there that was constructive, to allow people who were different through choice or design to live instead of survive or drown, to allow those being crippled by the system to reintegrate into society and move on, to mind as best as they could those who were self-destructive, to provide for and to listen to the destructive. They looked to England and saw the concept of the Simon, but energy for this project is ever steady and long-term, and not a short-term burst of explosive energy, or students mesmerised by the students of Paris and elsewhere and the history books. An amateur organisation was going to eventually transition into a professional enterprise, where a BOM, Board of Management, and management class were going to initially use volunteers and students, but ineluctably, thanks to state funding, they employed the damage to society to work for them. Sadly for the students who were idealists, they couldn't see the reality that they were losing control of the project from the off, and that many of their student pals were actually users, using it for their CV, to use as a crutch to get to that pulpit to propagate some populist idea they in their heart didn't care about, but they cared about the publicity and the doors open to well-paid jobs, to use it to play God with the vulnerable, to find others of a sick-like mind, to promote those of a warped outlook, to siphon off money, to do their best to make sure the floor of society is full of holes and twisted floorboards, so as they know when they turn in their bed for the night with their nightmares, they can sleep a bit easier, knowing they have made life a little bit hellish for others. They were always going to go from their community cooperative roots and professionalise. But to differentiate themselves from the other professional charities, they were going to embrace the secular ethos and project their new agey vibe and propaganda to appeal to students and those still living in a student mindset. They can't see it and they don't want to see it. The businessmen and users have moved in, selling them a lie, like charlatans selling a lie to religious believers. They think they are different, but they are not. Professional charities are corrupt, some right from the off, others a bit slower, but they are not held to account. Yeah, it would take little to tear down these paper tigers. For even a modicum of the truth would see investigation and dismissals and closing down. But above all, the withdrawal of public sympathies and monies. And then the state with his resources would follow suit. Yet this doesn't happen. Why? For society's party to this business model, society won't change it. It will take the few to expose and then to ask society to justify it. Why put hostel residents through the sleep deprivation misery? They will respond that it's good practice, but not all hostels do it. But the Simon does. Yet why this practice of sleep deprivation? Dig a bit deeper, you might get out of them that there is many addicts in the hostel and they frequently overdose, and to engage in early intervention to stop them from dying or suffering brain damage. Because there are plenty of residents dying from overdoses in the hostels. I spoke to Paddy, who told me 2 died in his Bentley hostel in 1 year. Now, the Simon don't want a negative publicity. They need to keep the propaganda going. Ask yourself, why you don't hear about any self-destructive and associated destructive activity within the hostels in the media? Because the Simon made the calculated decision that it might affect their insurance premium. It might draw the ire of the state and inspectors and police. Plus they don't want to have to deal with unhappy relatives and friends who may consider legal action against the organisation. They also don't want the reputation that if you move into the hostel, you will leave in a box. Okay, that's fair enough. But I am not an addict, nor are many other fellows in the hostel addicts. Why should we suffer? Plus, if you are an addict who hasn't a history of overdosing, why should you suffer? That's the key. If you have a proven history of ODing, overdosing, when you move into the hostel, you then give permission for a hostel to get disclosure on whether you have OD'd. Then they will disrupt your sleep every 3 hours or less, depending on how badly you mismanage your drug habit. Now the Simon may come up with the ludicrous excuse that everyone must be treated the same. But that's torture. Only when it comes to this torture are everyone treated the same, not when it comes to anything else in the hostel. Now imagine in a hospital setting there are patients that need to be constantly monitored, and that is used as an excuse to wake up all the patients in the hospital every 3 hours. How are they going to get better? To get better quicker? In fact, you might kill some of them. In fact, you definitely would. This exercise would be idiotic, especially if the excuse being proffered is because everyone must be treated the same. But let's get back to the addicts. Do they have a right to be left alone if they demand it? Surely with a written disclaimer by them, the Simon can't be affected by legal action or a hike in the insurance premium. Maybe for this disclaimer there can be a hike in the rent for that particular individual. The Simon may show favouritism to some residents and not charge the extra rent. The vast majority won't pay extra rent so as to keep the money for their next fix or bag of beers. So the torturers can still be happy. The sleep deprivation continues. But from my experience of hostels, it's a nasty tool to hammer the kind and the conscientious. They don't torture everyone. In fact, the destructive addicts who happily squeal and drag standards down and do the staff's dirty work are left alone. Let me spell this out. The addicts who need to be walking religiously are left alone by the staff to their beauty sleep. Now you are beginning to realise it is a method of control and abuse. Now the hostel may claim disingenuously that these addicts go to bed at 6 in the morning, so these rules go into abeyance at 7 in the morning. So just get this. If you go to bed early, they will torture you. If you go to bed in the daytime, they will leave you alone. Yet the stupid addicts can still OD. Can you not see it from this logic? It's all about torture. But even if the destructive addicts go to bed early, they will be left alone. Except if the staff know they are up in their room watching TV or playing a video game or puffing on a joint. The staff just might join them for a smoke of the funny stuff. This is not unusual for staff to partake in drug taking. It's not unusual for staff to engage in sexual liaisons with residents, which of course leads to favouritism and protection. The worse the degenerate is, the more the staff find them sexually attractive. So lock your nonsense up. If there are any hostile staff about, in fact, lock the lot of them up. So before the designated staff go to the rooms, they decide who on their list to torture and who is to be left alone. They look at the cameras to monitor who is about. They have their squealers who also monitor the corridors and hang around doors listening and putting ears to walls to tell them what is happening. This sounds like a gulag, doesn't it? This is an Orwellian existence. They then go up the corridor, waiting outside each appointed door to listen if you are asleep. If they hear you are awake, and that includes with the light off lying back in the bed, they will leave you alone. But if they hear you are asleep, especially in deep REM sleep, they will wake you. This involves a very bright torch into your eyes and then forcefully shaking you. Even if you are on your side, away from them, and they hear you are clearly snoring and your chest moving, in other words, they know you are alive and normally sleeping, they will still move your face to blind you with the torch. This is torture. It is so bad. If for some reason you instinctively grab the blankets to cover your eyes, they will switch off the torch and demand to speak to you. Why? They can hear me talking from under the blanket. I am okay. As the corridor light streams in, but they insist I let them see their face. This is control freakery. Then they start to yank at the blanket. I have no choice but to comply, as I need sleep. Then they switch on the torch and blind me and leave the room with deranged smiles, knowing they have made me angry and I won't sleep now. Do you understand that when you wake someone in the middle of REM sleep, they have knocked out of sorts for the rest of the night and the next day? They are knocked out of sorts for the rest of the night and the next day, and they can't go back to sleep. They have a brain fog following them around. This is torture and very rare. Now the state and county council and medical community and politicians and broader society are signing off on this. So it's acceptable and approved to sleep deprive an underclass in this country, but it's unacceptable and disapproved to sleep deprive inmates at Guantanamo, except if in the shifting sands of politics and culture they too are equated with the underclass in this state. And that can't happen. Looking at the recent history books and the callous indifference of society and the media to the suffering of the powerless, we kid ourselves we are different from those people over the last 100 years or so. One time people who are black were excluded from many jobs. Some jobs they might have got if they were useful idiots or in North American parlance, Uncle Toms. Of course this is racism. Man's inhumanity to his fellow man, but there is different methodology to racism today in many fields. They appoint the Uncle Toms of yesteryear to figurehead jobs. The useful idiots allow, via their skin colour, a sick Western culture to continue, and old whitey is still in control. Evil hides behind diversity and flowery language, not much different than from a few decades ago when it hid behind God and religion. Just note that black men and women of merit and conscience are still excluded from the gig. Today, as was the day yesterday, This is the real racism. Today, as was the day yesterday, this is the real racism. In fact, some of them might be on the street with me. I mention this reality as one of the perpetrators in the same hostel where I was staying was the new manager who ticked all the boxes of being a woman and black. I hope that maybe, just maybe, that she might be a bit more understanding towards us, but I was wrong. She ratcheted up the torture, and it was going to get worse. And I know if I was black, I would have got real special torture. The useful idiot would have made sure nobody black man was going to rally others for a better way of living. Alu told me when he was in the Winter Initiative that he was in the TV room watching the rubbish on the box that many of the hostel residents are addicted to, and that one of the boneheaded staff rushed in with an emergency anti-overdose device to give a chemical to a resident slumped in his chair. Now, Alu spotted in fairness straight away what was going on. Most residents wouldn't, as they would be stupefied or would conform to authority. He interceded and asked the staff member what he was up to. The member replied, to stop the man from dying. Alu incredulously told him that he is clearly asleep and not ODing, and slapped the fellow across the face to wake him out of his docile state, which duly happened. Then Alu pulled up the staff member and told him he clearly didn't know what he was doing and should be ran out of the place, and the training he and others are receiving is failing because they are too stupid to learn and the Simon are recruiting idiots. He pulled no punches as he further added the staff member could have killed the dozen chap or gave him brain damage. I'm going to leave it here. Back in the 19th and early 20th centuries, there was investigative men and women who sought to expose the truth and dismantle the lies propagated by many institutes. They got down and dirty, filled in their reports, wrote books about fact and fiction, with the earnest hope that it would change things. Today I don't see it. Instead it's journalism by numbers, treating what's on your doorstep as if it's faraway land called Channel 21 that you can switch off. You are being anaesthetised. Thank you and consider subscribing.